Welcome students to this video where we shall try to understand the different circumstances that gave birth to the English novel during the 18th century. Now this is part of your third semester honors paper, History of English Literature and Forms, ENGHC 3016. Okay. Now before going on to discussing the history of the novel, we should first understand what a novel is. And as students of literature, we will have to be very technical in our definition of the novel. Novels are extended works of fiction written in prose. So you can say it's a work of fiction which is written in prose and which is of considerable length. That is its primary feature. Okay, and now because novels are extended narratives, it becomes endowed with certain characteristics. It becomes possible to endow the novel with certain characteristic features which we cannot do in other forms, such as say the short story or the novella for that instance. Now talking about the characteristic features of novels, in novels, the writer has the ability, he or she has the freedom to introduce a larger number, a greater multitude, as well as a greater variety of characters. So you can meet so many different characters in a novel, right? Each character will exhibit different traits, different personalities. So because it is a lengthy narrative, we have the freedom to introduce such variety in characters. Okay. Now, because of this same fact, because of the fact that we have the advantage of length, novel also gives you the freedom to develop a more complex plot. Now, students, we have to be very cautious when we are using the term plot. As students of literature, you will have to know that plot is very different from the story. Plot is the arrangement of the different events in a narrative, whereas story is simply the synopsis, simply the summary of what happens in the novel. Say this happens first, then this happens, then ultimately this happens. That is the storyline. Now plot is how you present the story to your readers, how you arrange the different events which will ultimately give you your story, right? So again, coming back to the features of the novel, you because it is an extended narrative, you can also develop the setup. You develop not just the characters, you also develop the different situations, the different social milieu in which the characters function. And you have the ability, you have the freedom to make your characters more complex. Readers will be forced to analyze as to what are the different motives behind different characters behaving in different ways. Okay, so just remember, a novel is distinct from the short story. Short story is also a work of fiction written in prose, but then it is of much shorter length. Now an average novel will be around say 300 pages, whereas a short story will be say hardly 10 pages. It is also distinct from the novelette or the novella, which are again works of fiction written in prose, but these works are in between the short story and the novel. So longer than the short story, but shorter than your novel. Now, coming to the origins of the word novel, the term novel is derived from the Italian word novella, which means a little new thing. Now, a little new thing. So, in what happened in 14th century Italy, there was this practice of writing short tales and bringing out anthologies of those tales. For example, you can take Boccaccio's Decameron. So from that, we derived the word novel. So, see, you can again confuse the Italian term novella with our English novella. Now, novella has come to be used as synonymous with novelette, which, as I have already told, is a short novel. it's technically not a novel, but then a work of fiction which is longer than a story but shorter than a novel. Okay. Now we come to the narrative precursors of the novel. See, the novel cannot rise in a vacuum, right? You have to have a certain trajectory of development which ultimately gave birth to the English novel. So, see, if we talk about narrative precursors, there are many. You have the pastoral romances, you have the picaresque narratives, and you have the travel book. So, see, talking about pastoral romances, when we talk about pastoral literature, you have to first understand as to what pastoral literature is. Now, when we are talking about pastoral writings or pastoral literature, we are talking about a form of writing in which we see an idealization of rural life, especially the life of shepherds. You will see the narrator expressing a kind of nostalgia for the supposedly peaceful life, the harmonious life of a typical village setting. So you will see those things, the nostalgia for rural elements in pastoral literature. Now, pastoral romances were written by Greek writers as early as the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD. If we talk about English writers, then you have examples of pastoral romances such as Sir Philip Sidney's Arcadia, which is a hugely influential book. You have Thomas Lodge's Rosalind, which was the inspiration behind Shakespeare's As You Like It. Okay. Then we have the picaresque narratives. Now, again, see, you have to understand what the term picaresque means. Now, in picaresque narratives, you have a morally questionable character as the hero, a supposedly morally questionable. A character who is a rogue, a character who is a thief, and the different kinds of adventures that this character undergoes. Now, in picaresque narratives, most often or always you will see that there is no change or there is no transformation in the character of the hero. The hero remains a rogue till the end. Now, picaresque narratives are realist in nature, and they are episodic in structure. Episodic means that the different incidents in the narrative are not related to each other in terms of a definite storyline. The events are loosely connected just because of the fact that they happen to a single person. Now, suppose something happens to me today which has no connection to what happens to me tomorrow or say next year. But then these events are connected simply by the fact that they happen to me. So that is episodic in structure. And picaresque narratives are usually satiric in aim. Satiric, that is, they aim to expose society's double standards. They aim to expose and satirize society's moral values which actually are questionable things, because sometimes you see how people who talk about morality are often not the ones who practice morality, right? So in picaresque narratives, we have characters exposing the society's double standards. Then you have the travel narrative. Now see, right from the time of medieval English history, we have examples of the travel narrative structure, which was usually used as a means of presenting the stories. Now, if we talk about examples of the travel narrative, then you have the travels of Sir John Mandeville, which was written as early as 1375, that is the 14th century. So see, the novel has many narrative precursors. It was not as if during the 18th century suddenly something happened and the novel arose in a kind of vacuum. No, there were literary predecessors which, gradually developed into the form of the novel. Okay. Other examples of narrative predecessors include John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress. You have Afra Bain's Oronuko, you have William Congreve's Incognita. So there are several examples. In fact, in Incognita, you have Congreve giving a definition of novel. So going by Congreve's definition of the novel, novels are of a more familiar nature. They come near us and represent to us intrigues in practice, delight us with accidents and odd events, but not such as are wholly unusual or unprecedented. So, novels are familiar narratives. They deal with events which are more or less relatable to us. Okay, so now students, let us see the different circumstances, the socio-cultural circumstances that facilitated the rise of the English novel during the 18th century. If you see the slide, you can see the 18th century was the time of the Enlightenment. So what happened was the Enlightenment, students, it's a very complex thing which cannot be summed up in this video. You will need a whole series of videos to sum up the complex movement that the Enlightenment was. But to tell you in brief, it was an intellectual cultural phenomenon that manifested itself in Europe during the 18th century. If we talk about England, then the Enlightenment mainly was epitomized in England by the works of Sir Isaac Newton and philosophers like John Locke. So see, the Enlightenment was the age of reason. It was the time when people believed in the use of reason and the capacity of reason to unravel the wonders, to unravel the mysteries of the world. Sir Isaac Newton, you all have heard about him, right? Sir Isaac Newton published his Principia, 2 books, Principia and Optics, during the 18th century. Now, in these books, what he did was, he suggested that the laws of the universe are all explainable. It is possible to understand the natural laws by which the universe functioned. And he also suggested that because the universe is a very ordered, harmonious thing, therefore it is only possible that a divine creator had created this ordered universe, this united organic universe. So what happened was that scientists like Newton paved the way for the amalgamation of, for the seamless merging together of science and religion. Religious mysteries and rational wonder, scientific inquiry went hand in hand. Similarly, philosophers like John Locke, John Locke wrote this book called The Essay Concerning Human Understanding, and John Locke said that the human mind at the time of birth was a tabula rasa. See, tabula rasa is a term which means a blank page. So the human mind is completely void at the time of birth, and gradually through experience you learn things. So knowledge comes from experience. So again, Locke emphasizes the capacity of the individual human being to gain knowledge through the use of his intellect, through the use of his reason. Now see, because of this general rise in the intellectual culture, because of this rise in scientific thought, in scientific inquiry, what parallelly rose was that there was growth in industries, there was growth in science and technology. So with the growth in industries, gradually a mercantile and commercial class erupted. A commercial class grew up. So what happened during medieval England, or even say during Elizabethan England, there were the royalties and there were the lower classes, the peasantry. Now there was a middle class. Mostly occupied this middle class were mostly the professionals, those people who were engaged in different businesses. So gradually you had the concept of a middle class coming in. Now when there is a middle class, Concomitantly, there was also a rise in literacy. Now see, when you have a better lifestyle, when there is a rise in your income, of course, other things will follow. You will be able to educate your children, there will be more literacy, and you will be able to give your family a better lifestyle, right? You will be able to give them a more leisured life. So that was exactly the same thing that happens during the 18th century. The rise of the middle class as a byproduct of that steady growth in the middle class, what happened was the rise in female readership. So the wives and daughters of these businessmen that we are talking about, they often were educated and they did not have to do any manual labor. They did not have to engage in any manual tasks. So they had ample free time. They had ample free time, and they could engage or they could cultivate the habit of reading. Another factor that contributed towards the growth of the English novel was the growing popularity of circulating libraries. The first circulating library was established in Edinburgh in 1716, after which many such circulating libraries were established throughout England. Now what happened was that earlier, if people had to buy books and they could not afford to do so, now they had the option to borrow books from these libraries and read these books at a very nominal rate. So there was an increase in readership owing to these libraries, these mobile libraries. In fact, if you look at the history of the English novel, you will see how these libraries were a major factor in consolidating the form of the novel by dissolving any sort of class distinctions in literature. Earlier, there were the differences in social classes. Only those of an elite class could dare to own books, could dare to read books. Now, there were increasingly more and more number of people for whom it was possible to read different books. And in fact, the popularity of a book during 18th century England was decided by how many subscribers read those books. Like if it was popular amongst the different subscribers of a library, then it was considered as a marker of the success of the book. Okay, so see students, there were several factors that together contributed to the rise of the novel, and there was no single factor. You cannot just simply trace the trajectory of the English novel saying that this thing happened, then this happened, and ultimately there was the rise of the novel. No, it is a complex amalgamation of different circumstances, of different incidents, of different things that together made it possible for the rise of the novel. Okay, so in conclusion, what we can say is the novel is a form of literature which arose as a result of a confluence, of a merging together of different factors, and it was a literature which emerged at a specific point of history, catering to the needs of a specific class of people. It was a new form of literature which an emerging new middle class could relate to. Okay, so the novel kind of democratized literature. So if you look at the history of the novel, you will see how the novel managed to erase all sorts of class distinctions, all sorts of social barriers in literature. In novels, you will see characters who are drawn mostly from middle classes. The characters are not monarchs. These characters are not aristocrats. These characters are ordinary men like you and me. So students, that's all for this video. Thank you.